and welcome to Module 1 of Social Work 589, Working with Adult Survivors of Sexual Abuse. My name is Mickey Spurlick. In this course, we'll be learning how to work with survivors of sexual violence. According to the United States Department of Justice, sexual violence is any type of sexual contact or behavior that occurs without the explicit consent of the recipient. Falling under the definition of sexual assault are sexual activities such as forced sexual intercourse, forceful sodomy, child molestation, incest, fondling, and attempted rape. Sexual assault of any kind is a felony. Information about legal definitions of rape are available on the UB Counseling website. Broadly speaking, what we think of as rape is the perpetuation of an act of sexual intercourse with a person against his or her will or consent, whether his or her will is overcome by force or fear resulting from the threat of force, or by drugs administered without consent, or when, because of mental deficiency, he or she is incapable of giving consent, or when he or she is below the arbitrary age of consent. In other words, the term rape is used when penetration is involved, even slight penetration, and even if no ejaculation occurs. Also note that the threat of force is sufficient. Many people report fearing for their lives even when their attacker is not carrying a weapon. Additionally, New York state law does recognize that a married woman can be raped by her husband. Marriage does not necessarily imply consent. Rape in the first degree is defined as above, and the age of consent is 17. Rape in the second degree is not defined by consent. Rather, when one person is over 18 and the other is less than 14 years of age, the state defines any sexual intercourse between them as rape. Rape in the third degree is similarly defined. Here, one person is over 21 and the other is less than 17 years of age. Sexual abuse is also defined in 3 degrees according to the same system as rape. However, the difference is that penetration is not required. Rather, all that is required is sexual contact, which means the touching of intimate or sexual parts, either directly or through clothing. Therefore, sexual abuse in the first degree is roughly defined as sexual contact by force or threat of force, or when the individual is incapable of consenting due to mental deficiency, or when the individual is below age 17. Criminal sexual acts is the third major term, and it is also defined in 3 degrees. This term is used when the assault involves penetration to areas other than the vagina, like the rectum or the mouth. For childhood sexual abuse, our definition is expanded. Childhood sexual abuse includes any sexual act between an adult and a minor, or between 2 minors, when one exerts power over the other. It includes any instance of forcing, coercing, or persuading a child to engage in any type of sexual act. Childhood sexual abuse can also take the form of non-contact acts, such as exhibitionism, exposure to pornography, and communicating in a sexual manner with a child by the phone or over the internet. The prevalence of child sexual abuse is difficult to exactly determine because it is often not reported. Experts agree that the incidence is far greater than what is reported to authorities. Childhood sexual abuse is also not uniformly defined, so statistics that we see in the literature may vary. The statistics in this slide represent some of the research done on child sexual abuse. For instance, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Children's Bureau report that 9.2% of victimized children were sexually assaulted. Studies by David Finkelhor, director of the Crimes Against Children Research Center, show that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys experience childhood sexual abuse. In studies asking adults to self-report about their childhoods, 20% of women and between 5 to 10% of men report childhood sexual assault experiences. During a 1-year period in the U.S., 16% of youths aged 14 to 17 are sexually victimized. Over the course of their lifetime, 28% of U.S. youths aged 14 to 17 have been victimized. Children are most vulnerable to abuse between the ages of 7 and 13. Importantly, the U.S. Bureau of Justice reports that 93% of juvenile sexual assault victims know their attacker. Of these, 34.2% of attackers were family members, and 58.7% were acquaintances. Only 7% of the perpetrators were strangers to the victim. This is important information for us going forward in terms of helping survivors sort out interpersonal relationship issues. Looking at statistics for adult exposure, we see that results from the National Violence Against Women Survey of 2000 revealed that 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. This means that 17.7 million women and 2.8 million men in the United States report lifetime attempted or completed rape, with over 300,000 women and over 90,000 men being forcibly raped in the year preceding the survey. The U.S. Department of Justice 2003 National Crime Victimization Survey shows that although men do experience rape, 9 out of 10 rape victims are female. Overall, looking at data from a national survey in 2011, if we exclude rape, we find that 1 out of every 2 women and 1 out of every 5 men experience some sort of sexual violence victimization other than rape in their lives. Data from the Violence Against Women survey show that the lifetime rate of rape or attempted rape for women is unequally distributed among racial and ethnic categories, with Native American and Alaskan Native women and women who report being of mixed race heritage being more at risk. And here you see the percentages amongst some categories. The effects of sexual abuse are far-ranging. Sexual abuse has been found to be implicated in many adverse outcomes, including mental illnesses like post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, and psychosis, and physical illnesses including sexually transmitted disease, substance use, sleeping disorders, and eating disorders. It is implicated in intergenerational cycles of violence through disruptions in parent-infant attachments and familial patterns of abuse and neglect, and has effects in pregnancy including shorter gestation and low birth weight. Those who have been victimized may engage in various forms of self-harm, risk-taking, and may have suicide ideation, attempts, or actual suicide. Those who have been victimized as children are also at risk for later abuse, including intimate partner violence and sexual assault. Given all this, it is clear that for many of our clients, a history of sexual abuse or other trauma has been a main contributing factor to their distress. I assume at this point in your studies that you've been exposed to the socio-ecological model. What is definitely true about sexual abuse is that it is not something that is happening in a vacuum. There are risk factors that exert influence on sexual abuse, both for victims and for perpetrators. Among risk factors for victims, family structure is one of the most important risk factors for childhood sexual abuse. Children who live with 2 married biological parents are at low risk for abuse. The risk increases when children live with step-parents or a single parent. Children living without either parent, like foster children, are 10 times more likely to be sexually abused than children that live with both biological parents. Children who live with a single parent who have a live-in partner are at the highest risk. They are, in fact, 20 times more likely to be victims of child sexual abuse than children living with both biological parents. However, there also is newer literature showing that there is no additional risk for children who are living with same-sex parents. Gender is also a major factor in sexual abuse. Females are 5 times more likely to be abused than males. The age of the male being abused also plays a part. 8% of victims aged 12 to 17 are male, while 26% of victims under the age of 12 are male. Age in general is a significant factor in sexual abuse. While there is risk for children at all ages, children are most vulnerable to abuse between the ages of 7 and 13. The median age for reported abuse is 9 years old. However, more than 20% of children are sexually abused before the age of 8. Race and ethnicity are an important factor in identifying sexual abuse. African American children have almost twice the risk of sexual abuse than white children. Children of Hispanic ethnicity have a slightly greater risk than non-Hispanic white children. The risk for sexual abuse is tripled for children whose parents are not in the labor force. And children in low socioeconomic status households are 3 times as likely to be identified as a victim of child abuse. Most studies have reported that children with disabilities are at greater risk for sexual abuse. The latest research identified incidents of child sexual abuse involving children with disabilities at only half the rate of their non-disabled peers. Contrary to what we might think, children who live in rural areas are almost 2 times more likely to be identified as victims of child sexual abuse. And children who witness or are the victim of other crimes are significantly more likely to be sexually abused. There are several risk factors for perpetration that have been identified in the literature. These include several levels in our nested ecological model, including individual, relationship, community, and society factors. Individual risk factors include alcohol and drug use, delinquency, empathic deficits, general aggressiveness and acceptance of violence, early sexual initiation, coercive sexual fantasies, preference for impersonal sex and sexual risk-taking, exposure to sexually explicit media, hostility towards women, adherence to traditional gender role norms, hypermasculinity, suicidal behavior, and prior sexual victimization or perpetration. Among the relationship factors increasing the risk for perpetration, these include living in a family environment characterized by physical violence and conflict, a childhood history of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, having an emotionally unsupportive family environment, poor parent-child relationships, particularly with fathers, being in association with sexually aggressive, hypermasculine, and delinquent peers, and having involvement in a violent or abusive intimate relationship. Community factors and societal risk factors have also been identified. Community factors include poverty, lack of employment opportunities, lack of institutional support from police and judicial system, general tolerance of sexual violence within the community, and weak community sanctions against sexual violence perpetrators. Societal factors include norms that support sexual violence, societal norms that support male superiority and sexual entitlement. Excuse me. My mouse has gone away. There it is. Societal norms that maintain women's inferiority and sexual submissiveness, weak laws and policies related to sexual violence and gender equity, and high levels of crime and other forms of violence. So the current DSM-5, and if you're not familiar with that by now, it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, put out by the American Psychiatric Association. We have the most recent edition is DSM-5. And the criteria to be diagnosed with pedophilic disorder is as follows. Criterion A describes an individual who experiences over a period of at least 6 months recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors involving sexual activity with a prepubescent child or children, generally age 13 years or younger. Criterion B states that this person has acted on these sexual urges, or the sexual urges or fantasies cause marked distress or interpersonal difficulty. And criterion C specifies that the person is at least age 16 years and at least 5 years older than the child or children in the first criterion. Interestingly, in the DSM-5, it states that people who meet criterion A but not criterion B meaning that they have not acted on such urges, they have such urges but have not acted on them, might have a pedophilic sexual orientation rather than pedophilic disorder. Now, this wording has been strongly criticized as being potentially condoning of pedophilia and equating it with other forms of sexual orientation, to the degree that the American Psychiatric Association had to issue a release in October of 2013 indicating a proposed word change from pedophilic sexual orientation to pedophilic sexual interest to address this criticism. This distinction is important for us in terms of understanding societal level influences. Despite laws both nationally and internationally designed to prevent such abuse, there are those who publicly advocate for adult-child sexual contact. This has historically been referred to as pederasty. So while this presentation so far has been heavy on the statistics about sexual abuse, that is not the overarching plan for this class. The plan is for us to focus primarily on what we can do to help our clients to heal from the effects of sexual trauma. Toward that end, we will look at overall therapeutic considerations for working with survivors, and we'll explore various treatment modalities. My hope is that this will provide an overview of the various treatments that are currently available and help you determine in a very practical sense what you might want to develop expertise in for your future work with clients. It's important to note as we set out on this journey together that there is no one-size-fits-all approach for either you or any particular client. It's important instead to put together a toolkit of treatment modalities that are evidence-based and effective treatments that you can draw from in different situations. In our next module, we will go over the principles of trauma-informed care, and we will be exploring a number of trauma-specific treatments throughout this course. But today I want to specifically focus in the remaining slides on issues related to care of ourselves as therapists and learners. Not only is it important to turn a trauma-informed lens on our work with clients and communities, we must also turn that lens with compassion towards ourselves as social workers. Being a witness to trauma and its effects can and does lead to vicarious or secondary trauma, the effects of which may look very much like post-traumatic stress, which we will discuss in a moment. But whether or not we are feel traumatized by working with another person's trauma, still we can experience compassion fatigue due to the emotional labor and investment that is just part and parcel of what we do. In a review of the literature for a research report on their mindfulness-based stress reduction program for graduate counseling students, Shapiro and colleagues identified many reported effects of stress, including not only post-trauma specific symptoms, but also depression, exhaustion, anxiety, reduced self-esteem, psychosocial isolation, disruptions in personal relationships, and loneliness. The literature also suggests that there can be a loss of professional effectiveness due to the impact on attention and concentration, and how stress impinges on decision-making. And also, we see a reduction in the therapist's ability to establish strong client relationships, which taken all together, of course, can lead to occupational burnout. You may have already read the disclaimer about vicarious traumatization and re-traumatization in your syllabus for this class, and for other classes here at UB. It bears mentioning here as well. The material presented in this course may be upsetting and even disturbing at times. Those of us who are in the helping professions and who assist trauma survivors are at risk for trauma reactions due to our exposure to our client's traumatic experience. Listening empathetically to a survivor's story may put us at risk of feeling as though we have personally witnessed the traumatic events. What Figley in 1995 coined as compassion stress can lead to compassion fatigue, some of the effects of which we have just discussed in the previous slide in this presentation. However, a more persistent and severe reaction to working with trauma survivors has been described by Perlman and Sakvitny and is known as vicarious traumatization. Those of us who are highly empathetic, have a history of trauma ourselves, or are inexperienced at working with trauma survivors might be at higher risk than others for vicarious traumatization, either directly as a result of hearing about another's trauma or for re-traumatization for those of us with our own trauma histories. As mentioned in the syllabus, some of the material presented in this course will likely be new to you, and some may be upsetting or temporarily overwhelming. You will need to use your skills in self-awareness and self-care during this semester. One way to remind yourself about self-care is to take a look at the Self-Care Starter Kit on the UB School Social Work website. It reminds you of useful tools like eating well, getting enough sleep, and exercising, but also suggests ways you can assess your own level of self-care and help you figure out what your needs are and how to get them met. This is particularly important if you have risk factors like being a survivor of trauma yourself. Good self-care goes a long way in minimizing distress and bouncing back from it, but be sure to seek assistance from a mental health professional if you are not coping well. In addition to the information available on the website, we will have a weekly self-care check-in as a regular feature of this online course. Please also talk to me if you find you're having a hard time with any of the course material, and I can help you strategize how to get your needs met. If you or anyone you know needs help related to sexual assault, it is available. On the national level, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network is the nation's largest anti-sexual assault organization, and they operate a hotline that can help connect victims to local rape crisis centers. Locally, UB has counseling services available and also maintains a 24-hour hotline for crisis situations. One last note. In this class, we will try to focus on the here and now, that is, what we can do to help survivors move through their pain. However, telling the trauma and witnessing the telling is often an integral part of the therapeutic healing journey. So once again, I urge you to make sure that not just for purposes of this class, but for your life work going forward, that you establish self-care and supervision routines to sustain and nourish you. See you next time. Oh, one last note. This is my email on how to get a hold of me if you don't already have it. Let me know if you need anything. Bye-bye.